You touch something greater than yourself, feel connected to everything, experience profound clarity and peace, then return to your regular life and can barely get out of bed. The dishes pile up. Work feels meaningless. The goals that once drove you forward now seem strangely empty. This puzzles so many people I've worked with over the years. I thought spiritual awakening would make me more productive, more engaged with life, they tell me. Instead, I feel like I'm moving through molasses. Why can't I care about things that used to matter to me? This experience is incredibly common, though rarely discussed. You are not broken. You have not failed. This motivational crisis after awakening is not just normal. It's necessary. Think about what happens during awakening. You glimpse reality beyond your usual perception. You see through the stories that once organized your life. The job title that defined you, the goal society praised you for pursuing, the identity you carefully construction rather than solid truths. When the foundations shift, the house cannot stand unchanged. Your old motivations were built on assumptions. Your awakening has transformed. The promotion, the bigger house, the social status, the perfect relationship, these goals came from an understanding of yourself that has fundamentally changed. I remember talking with a young executive who experienced profound awakening during a silent retreat. When he returned to work, he stared at his computer screen, feeling completely disconnected from the quarterly targets that once consumed him. I keep asking myself, what's the point of all this? He told me. His colleagues thought he was depressed. In truth, he was seeing clearly for the first time. Your lack of motivation isn't regression, it's pregression. But it certainly doesn't feel that way when you're in it. Think about how motivation worked before your awakening. You moved toward what promised pleasure, fulfillment, security, validation. You moved away from what threatened pain, emptiness, insecurity, criticism. Now you've glimpsed something beyond this reward-punishment system. You've experienced fulfillment that doesn't depend on achievement. You've touched peace that doesn't require controlled circumstances. The old motivational structures simply cannot work the same way anymore. A woman in my practice described it perfectly. It's like I was playing a board game with total seriousness, completely invested in winning. Then I stood up and saw it was just a game. Now they want me to sit back down and keep playing with the same intensity, but I can't. I see it differently now. This shift affects everyone who experiences authentic awakening, regardless of the path that brought them there, whether through meditation, psychedelics, life-threatening illness, profound love, or spontaneous experience. The aftermath often includes this strange inertia. Your ego, the organizing center of your conscious mind, resists what awakening reveals. It senses a threat to its position and responds accordingly. Part of your motivational problem comes from this resistance. Think of your ego like a middle manager who suddenly discovers the company is reorganizing. This manager has run things a certain way for decades. Now high awareness shows a different approach is needed. Does this manager cheerfully implement the new vision? Rarely. More often there's foot dragging, sabotage. I know what I experienced was real, a teacher told me after her awakening. I know it changed everything. But part of me keeps trying to squeeze that experience into my old life, instead of letting my life transform around what I've seen. Her motivation returned only when she stopped forcing this impossible fit. You've likely invested heavily in your pre-awakening identity. You've developed skills, relationships, and habits organized around a particular sense of self. Awakening doesn't invalidate these completely, but it does place them in a vastly expanded context. The adjustment period naturally affects your motivation. I worked with an artist who built his entire identity around his creative uniqueness. After awakening to the universal consciousness underlying all individuality, he couldn't pick up a paintbrush for months. If we're all expressions of the same consciousness, he asked me, what's the point of my individual creation? His motivation returned when he began seeing his art as consciousness exploring a particular expression through his unique form, rather than as a way to distinguish himself from others. The contrast between awakened states and ordinary consciousness creates another motivational challenge. You've experienced colors more vivid than you knew existed, then return to a world that seems faded by comparison. How can I get excited about my normal life after that? People ask me. It's like eating plain rice after tasting the most exquisite meal imaginable. This contrast naturally affects motivation. Activities that once engaged you fully now seem limited or hollow compared to the expansiveness you've experienced. The mundane world hasn't changed, but your perception of it has. This gap between expanded awareness and ordinary activities creates friction that manifests as inertia. A businessman described this perfectly. I sit in meetings discussing profit margins and market share, while part of me is aware of this vast field of love underlying everything. The disconnection is almost physically painful. Spiritual awakening dissolves structures of meaning that previously organized your life. Goals that seemed self-evidently important now appear arbitrary. Achievement, acquisition, status. These motivational pillars often crumble in awakening's light. I remember a successful attorney who experienced profound awakening through a near-death experience. Upon returning to work, she found herself unable to generate the aggressive energy her job required. I used to believe winning the case was all that mattered, she told me. Now I see the person on the other side, and I can summon that old fighting spirit. Your awakening has shown you a larger reality. The scripts society offered, what to pursue, what defines success, what makes life meaningful, now appear as just one set of possibilities among many. This relativizing of meaning creates freedom, but also disorientation. The thread connecting effort to reward, action to meaning, has been cut. You must weave a new connection that honors both your awakened understanding and your continued human existence. This reweaving takes time, during which motivation naturally wanes. I used to know exactly why I was doing everything, a patient told me. Now I second-guess every decision, wondering if it aligns with what I've experienced or if I'm falling back into unconscious patterns. After awakening, shadow elements often emerge into awareness. Aspects of yourself previously hidden from consciousness now seek recognition and integration. This emergence commonly manifests as resistance to moving forward. Your psyche demands attention to what has been neglected. Your previous motivation may have been partly energized by unconscious forces you can now see clearly. Perhaps you pursued achievement to prove your worth to an internalized critical parent. Maybe financial security drove you because of unaddressed childhood scarcity. These unconscious drivers provided energy that becomes unavailable when awakening brings them into awareness. I worked with a woman who built a successful business, driven by a need to prove herself to her dismissive father. After awakening showed her this pattern clearly, her entrepreneurial drive vanished. I don't know what to do now, she told me. I can't pretend I don't see the real reason I pushed myself so hard, but without that drive, I feel lost. This period often involves confronting spiritual bypassing. The ways you may have used spiritual ideas or practices to avoid psychological work. True awakening doesn't eliminate psychological challenges, but illuminates them more clearly, requiring integration rather than transcendence. A spiritual teacher I counseled faced this directly. I've been teaching others about compassion and presence for years, he admitted. Why using these teachings to avoid my own anger and grief? Now I can't continue teaching without addressing what I've been avoiding. His motivation for his spiritual work returned only after confronting these shadow elements directly. The insights from awakening must be translated into daily life for healthy motivation to return. This integration requires bringing expanded awareness into concrete choices, relationships, and activities. Without this translation, awakening remains a peak experience rather than a transformed way of living. Many people struggle with this practicality. How do I bring my experience of boundless consciousness into my job as an accountant? They ask. How does my glimpse of universal love relate to arguing with my teenager about screen time? I remember a corporate executive who experienced profound awakening during a meditation retreat. He returned to work unable to engage with the competitive, often cutthroat environment he once thrived in. His breakthrough came when he realized he could bring the same presence, clarity, and compassion he experienced in meditation into his leadership. His business became a vehicle for expressing awakened values rather than an obstacle to spiritual life. The apparent gap between spiritual insight and ordinary living creates a motivational vacuum until you build bridges between these seemingly separate worlds. These bridges don't appear overnight. They require experimentation, attention, and time to construct. A teacher in my practice described her post-awakening classroom experience. I stood before my students feeling completely fraudulent. The curriculum seemed arbitrary, the rules pointless. I couldn't find my way back to the teacher I had been. Her motivation returned when she began seeing each interaction with students as an opportunity to practice presence. Authentic motivation emerges gradually from alignment with your true nature, rather than conditioned patterns. After awakening, motivation must spring from your essence rather than your personality, from being rather than doing, from intrinsic rather than extrinsic rewards. Watch what naturally draws your attention and energy without judgment. Small sparks of interest or enjoyment, brief moments of spontaneous engagement may signal the emergence of authentic motivation. These sparks often appear in unexpected places, unrelated to your previous sources of drive. A bushman found himself drawn to gardening after his awakening, something he'd never had interest in before. There's something about working with the earth that feels right in a way my corporate work never did, he told me. This simple activity gradually restored his motivational energy, which eventually extended to other areas of his life. Your new motivation likely feels different from your previous drive. It may feel more like allowing than striving, more like responding than initiating, more like serving than achieving. This quality reflects motivation flowing from your whole being rather than from fragmented aspects of self. The awakened perspective perceives interconnection with all life. Motivation increasingly comes from this awareness, from contributing to something larger than personal gain. Purpose emerges from participating consciously in the whole rather than advancing the self. An artist described her changed relationship to creativity. Before, I created to express my unique vision, to stand out from others. Now I create to communicate what moves through me, to serve as a channel for something larger than my personal identity. This shift transformed both her art and her relationship to making it. Notice what feels meaningful from your awakened perspective rather than what should feel meaningful according to previous standards. Simple acts of kindness, moments of full presence, creative expression that connects rather than impresses. These often carry the seeds of post-awakening motivation. I find myself caring deeply about things I never noticed before, a patient told me. The quality of my interactions with the cashier at my grocery store suddenly seems more important than the promotion I've been working toward for years. Creating meaning after a spiritual awakening comes from bringing higher awareness into everyday reality. This alchemy transforms ordinary activities from mundane to sacred, not by their outer appearance, but through the consciousness you bring to them. I worked with a mother who experienced profound awakening through childbirth. She struggled with motivation during early parenthood, finding the endless routine of feeding, changing, and soothing tedious despite her love for her child. Her perspective shifted when she began seeing each interaction as an opportunity to practice presence, to embody love in tangible form. The external activities remained the same, but her experience transformed completely. Creating meaning requires active participation rather than passive waiting. You must experiment with new ways of engaging that reflect your expanded awareness. Through this experimentation, you discover where and how your awakened understanding can manifest in tangible reality. I kept waiting for motivation to return on its own, a writer told me after his awakening experience. I finally realized I needed to start writing without motivation, to see what emerged when I showed up without the familiar drive that used to fuel my work. This practice gradually revealed a new relationship to creativity that felt aligned with his awakened understanding. After awakening, meaning increasingly derives from how fully present you can be, rather than what you accomplish. Achievement continues to have value, but transforms from an end in itself to a byproduct of authentic expression and service. This shift fundamentally changes your experience of motivation. Let me share some practical approaches that have helped others navigate this post-awakening motivational desert. Start with acceptance of your current experience without labeling it as wrong. The lack of motivation itself contains wisdom about your transition if you listen with openness rather than resistance. For months, I fought against my changed state, a businessman told me. I tried to force myself back into my old patterns, to care about the things that used to drive me. Things shifted when I finally accepted that my old motivation wasn't coming back, and something new needed to emerge. Practice patience with the process. Psychological reorganization after spiritual awakening follows its own timeline, rarely conforming to our preferences or expectations. Forcing motivation before this reorganization completes often creates falseness or fragmentation. Engage with small actions without attachment to outcomes. Simple activities performed with full attention help build bridges between expanded awareness and concrete reality. Walking mindfully, preparing food with presence, listening wholeheartedly to another person, all help integrate the awakening into daily life. Allow yourself periods of purposeful non-doing, times when you simply witness your experience without agenda or direction. These fallow periods permit deeper integration of awakening insights and create space for authentic motivation to emerge organically. Connect with others who understand this transition. Community provides context and support for what can otherwise feel like a solitary and confusing process. Sharing experiences with those who have traversed similar territory helps normalize your experience and provides perspective. Finding others who understood what I was going through saved me, a teacher told me after her motivational crisis. I thought I was going crazy or sliding into depression until I met people who recognized my experience as part of a natural spiritual process. Conventional motivation gives way to something more fundamental after spiritual awakening. Rather than being driven by acquisition, achievement, or approval, you become drawn forward by the possibility of greater wholeness, deeper authenticity, fuller expression of what you have glimpsed in awakened states. This transition asks you to trust a process larger than your individual will or preference. The motivation that eventually emerges comes not from striving, but from aligning with what you recognize as true. It feels less like driving yourself forward and more like allowing yourself to be moved by what matters most deeply. The dark night that follows spiritual dawn serves an essential purpose in your development. Without this period of emptiness and reorganization, awakening insights remain separate from your lived reality, creating fragmentation. Trust that what appears as lack of motivation actually prepares the ground for more authentic expression and engagement. The dissolution of old drivers creates space for motivation that springs from essence rather than conditioning, from truth rather than adaptation. You have not lost your way, but are finding a new way forward, one that honors both the vastness you have glimpsed and the particularity of your human life. This integration represents the true work of spiritual maturation, the bridge between transcendent insight and ordinary expression. Your lack of motivation contains a gift if you receive it with patience and attention. It breaks patterns that would have limited your further development. It creates space for something more authentic to emerge. It asks you to trust what you have experienced rather than returning to what you have been told. The awakened life ultimately finds motivation not in achieving or becoming, but in allowing the fullness of what you already are to express itself through your particular human form. This expression brings a sense of rightness and purpose beyond what conventional motivation could ever provide.